Want to stay up to date with everything that's happening on the show? Or do you have a story that you'd like to submit for one of our Listener Stories episodes? You can get in touch with the show via the website at www.hauntedukpodcast.com, on Instagram at hauntedukpodcast, on X at hauntedukpod, or you can email us at contactus@hauntedukpodcast.com. We're also on Facebook and TikTok. And if you want to support the show, you can do it via either Patreon or Ko-fi. Both platforms have exactly the same content, but work in slightly different ways. One of the advantages of Patreon is its sleek user interface, but if you want to avoid those pesky additional charges Apple, Google, and Patreon apply to your subscription, then why not give Ko-fi a try? Simply open a browser window and type ko-fi/Haunted UK Podcast. That's Ko-fi/Haunted UK Podcast, and you'll soon find us. Whichever platform you choose, we're sure you'll enjoy the bonus content. Thanks for listening, and enjoy the episode. This is the Haunted UK Podcast's Short Haunts. Welcome, dear listeners, to our series of short haunts. A shot of scary, just for you. So grab a hot chocolate, maybe a tea, maybe something stronger, because this is Haunted UK Podcast's Short Haunts. Mum, is that you? It has to be noted that here at Haunted UK Podcast Towers, we often receive stories from listeners who were young in the 1980s and 1990s. I don't think this is because there was more paranormal activity in the years between 1980 and 2000. And we definitely know that's not the case. And to preface this, we get plenty of fantastic stories from recent years too, and of course, from decades before. But there's something unusually charged about this time. A time sitting there tentatively, precariously perched just before the internet. A time when young people had maybe a bit more freedom and no choice but to fill in the cracks of boredom, which is so often papered over with smart technology now. And it was this boredom, perhaps, which led us to clamber onto our mountain bikes, without any cycling helmets, without any fear, only a dizzying array of bike reflectors that usually were fished out free from cereal packets proudly fixed onto our wheels. And we would head out with our friends to ruins, demolished sites, places we shouldn't go, places with legends and stories to scare ourselves witless. And this story is no different. And for this, once again, we travel back on our bikes to the early 1990s. To 1993, to be precise. Our listener wishes to remain anonymous as some of the issues discussed here are personal. But it's one hell of a tale. One that can only be told amongst friends. So, dear friends, let's begin. And with our listener who wants to be known as Cassie. Cassie recounts. What is this story about? Well, I think many things, and it wasn't until last weekend where it suddenly felt all tied together. When my mum revealed something to me, instantly all the coincidences and scary feelings I had at that time made sense. And what my mum told me nearly made me drop the glass I was holding. It was her birthday last weekend, and we were having a lovely time drinking red wine in the garden. It was after a week-long rainy spell, and the sunshine seemed to come out especially just for us. We were talking about houses we had lived in over the years, the neighbours we had, when all of a sudden my mum stopped and said, "You know, I'll never forget that time you were hysterical. You know the night I mean. It was so unlike you. I'll never forget it." It took me a second to realise what she was referring to, and I replied, "You mean when I was about 11 when—" She cut me short and said, "Yes, that time." My sister-in-law, sitting back on the garden bench, sunning herself, overheard, so she leant forward and asked us what on earth we were talking about. And I felt the need to tell her, just like I'm going to tell you now. So it was 1993, and I was 11 years old, nearly 12. In fact, I couldn't wait for my 12th birthday. I was hoping for a new bike. I lived in a time where a kid could just go out on their bike with friends, without the lure of phones, and sometimes, just sometimes, without a care in the world. It was a spring day, a Saturday, and I had just finished a 3-hour stint of Irish dancing class, and I arrived home to find the football fixed on the telly for the afternoon, with Des Lynam's voice faithfully ringing out throughout the house, signalling to me an afternoon of absolute boredom. Thankfully, it wasn't raining, and I went into my room for a bit of slumping on the bed, staring into space, reflecting upon the fact that I still didn't like this room at all. But I was at peace with this. At least, this was my new room, and that was that. But let me tell you, it had taken a while for me to get to this point. The room was in a lovely 1930s semi-detached. We'd been there for a year, and it was the house my dad grew up in. My grandparents were in the pub trade, and in 1992 decided to retire to Ireland, and the family home, which they had owned and had previously rented out to my great-uncle, who lived there for many years, was my dad's again, if he wanted. And it was a bit of a step up from our old house. It was a bit of luck, but I didn't see it that way. You see, I loved the family home we were moving from. It was terraced and higgledy-piggledy. It had a long garden with a hill at the bottom for sledging and running down with my friends. And my bedroom, if I remember, was totally dedicated to every shade of pink. But how I saw my first home is how my dad saw his first home. And that's what we were moving into. And so we moved in, and it wasn't long before I started to be troubled by what I recognize now as OCD and intrusive thoughts. I remember being horrified by the realization that I would certainly one day die, or even worse than that the people I loved will one day die too. Or the most troubling thought of all, I could make that happen by simply wishing them dead. Just by thinking it. It was an awful time, and I really became withdrawn. Scared of my own thoughts. Despite being tormented by this, I noticed my mum wasn't her usual self too. She seemed quieter and not fully convinced that this was the right move for us either. Amidst this sea of horrendous thought, I bizarrely fell in love with a TV program. I don't know if anyone remembers The House of Elliot, about the 1920s fashion house. Well, I became obsessed with it. and got my rib-length hair chopped into a 1920s-style flapper bob. My parents humoured me, even buying a 1920s kidney-shaped dressing table and mahogany old bedstead from a very old lady around the corner who was ready to trash it. I was so glad my dad spotted it, because my goodness, they were so beautiful, and for a while these items in my new room gave me a lot of contentment. I lived in a perpetual 1922. The furniture really suited the house, that room. If I wanted to tie this story up neatly with ribbons, I guess I could say that what happened next all stemmed from maybe bringing the old furniture into the house. But it wasn't. It was the house. It wasn't right for us. My dad loved the place and so desperately wanted it to be our family home, just like it was his. And for him, the house beheld many happy memories. So, as I said, it was in the family, the house, and I never liked it. Years before, my granny would take me there to visit my great-uncle, who I loved, but as soon as we got out of the car, I would burst into tears and say, "I don't want to go in there, I'm scared." Granny would berate me a little bit, then say sorry and resort to promising me sweets, mints, and a cuddle, if only I would go in. Then we would go in, but I would find it really difficult. There was something about the house which made me want to run away. It was quite dark with lots of shadows and crannies and corners I didn't like, and a 1970s swirly carpet, which to my 5-year-old mind seemed alive with the potential to snap at my feet. The house seemed alive to me. I was a sensitive child, and I think I just felt too many feelings in there. That's the only way I can explain it. So imagine my anxiety when 5 years later, it was announced that this was to be our new home. And now on that boring Des Lynam-infused Saturday, I was stood resigned in that bedroom, looking into the garden where I could see the plum tree which in summer would draw in too many wasps, tucked right behind a big oak tree which loomed over 2 gardens, blocking out all the light. Forcing me out of my reverie on this particular Saturday, the doorbell rang. It was Jess from up the road. We hopped onto our bikes, deciding to call for Haley on the way. I was feeling a lot better at this point. My hair had grown. I wasn't as obsessed with the 1920s. My thoughts were less intrusive. I was on my bike a lot, and I had made friends in the area. In truth, at this point, I was okay with the house, although it never went much over the marker of okay. Okay seemed a fragile state, which could change any moment if I thought too hard. But I was over the seismic change of moving. I guess I had accepted. This was home now. This wasn't the case for my mum, though. She was a bit tearful, full of headaches. I wouldn't say I didn't recognize her, but she wasn't herself. We had some new neighbors, and it was becoming apparent that they were noisy. A bit like poltergeists, slowly but surely their activity got worse, banging about, cackling, playing music on weeknights loudly at odd hours, and then there was the loud rave music after the pub on a Friday. It was driving us all to the edge, but Mum wasn't getting much sleep at all, and I remember her in the kitchen once clanging saucepans about angrily and saying,
"This isn't my house. This just isn't my house."
I couldn't even give her a hug. She wouldn't take it. At this point, just like I had changed my appearance drastically when I moved in, my mum looked different too. For as long as I could remember, she had sunshine short blonde hair, but lately she had grown it, gone darker, put a perm in it. She looked beautiful, but also not really herself. Mum just wasn't herself. I digress again. So Jess was at my door, and we decided to call for Haley up the street and then head to our new favourite spot, a derelict cottage in a field behind the bowling club. It's now a new housing site, but in 1993 it was just a ramshackle group of fields with this odd old farmhouse in ruins. And it was a place just waiting for young minds desperate for something to do. A place ready for imagined ghostly goings-on. I vaguely remember us having a bag of apple-flavoured gobstoppers and other luminous sweet treats, which we dumped into the centre of our circle as we told ghost stories, psyching each other up in such an eerie setting. And of course, the Bloody Mary tale cropped up, which always seriously freaked me out. Anyway, I think a pigeon flew about in the rafters, and we all screamed.
Oh my god, Leggett, it's Bloody Mary!
That it was Bloody Mary, and ran with a force only kids have, vowing we would come back tomorrow to see if there really was anything there. It was getting late by now, and so we all split home. The night before, we had another night of Friday night rave music coming from next door, and my mum doing battle with them to turn it down. I remember them being particularly vile to my mum. Anyway, on this night, we were all tired, and after the usual Saturday night TV of Noel's house party, the Generation Game, and I think probably the start of a crap film, it was time to go to bed, but I was dreading it. I don't know if you remember a time when you were a kid and someone had filled you in with a ghost story that day. Going to bed then by yourself seemed like the very worst thing you could ever possibly do. Your room was ready, waiting, suddenly becoming the set of a horror flick, and you, the unwilling protagonist as soon as that side lamp goes out. And I was on dodgy ground with that room as it was. As it goes, I got to sleep surprisingly easy. I think being kept awake from the rave music the night before, plus the 3 hours of Irish dancing and biking all afternoon probably helped. But then it happened. I woke up in the early hours and I sat bolt upright, like a magnet had drawn me forward. It was with such a violent velocity, almost like I was hurtling forward in a car that brakes too hard. Whenever we have a primal-like panic, I think there's some vestal of a rational thought shrieking there under the hysteria, if you can just about hear it. And this, to my horror, was this. There's someone standing there, at the foot of my bed. My mind quickly took in a white dress, a woman with dark wavy hair, some smoke or mist, I wasn't sure, and a face with a slight resigned smile on her face, staring straight at me, not letting my gaze go. It was dark, and although I can remember the intense gaze and slight smile, I couldn't quite make out the finer details of her face, and in my panic, I formed another thought. It was Mum, as real as solid as she was, standing there, and I clearly remember saying,
Mum, is that you?
Nanoseconds passed, but it felt a lot longer as I stared at her face, and then I realized with a breakout of full-on horror that this, whatever this was, wasn't my mum. It was probably one of the worst realizations of my life. Instantly, I thought we had an intruder and screamed for dear life. And it was dear life, because I really believed someone had broken into my room. My mum and dad came rushing in.
Cassie, what's wrong? Shush. Come on, calm down. What's wrong?
And I was screaming, shaking so relieved they were there, but when the light was switched on, whoever was there was gone. I was a wreck, of course. Normally my parents would have been annoyed if I had screamed like that in the night, as my brother was so young, but they could see this was real to me. I thought she was you, Mum, I sobbed. But she wasn't. That wasn't you. Was it, Mum? And I knew it wasn't her. My mum calmed me down, reassured me that all it was a bad dream. And God knows how, but she convinced me to stay the rest of the night in that room. I kept the light on though, and I didn't sleep. And now all these years later, I can still see her face. Immovable, oddly serene, staring straight at me. There was a smile, but she also looked sad. I really can still see her so clearly even now, and she wasn't transparent in any way like you imagine a ghost to be, but solid, three-dimensional, as real as anyone standing in front of me. And I still can't quite forget it. In that way, she still haunts me. For months after, I was still trying to make sense of it. Was I awake but still dreaming? My mind still in that place of fear from the cottage that day? Was she Bloody Mary, fully realized at the bottom of my bed? Was she a weird doppelganger version of my mum? A relative from heaven? A ghost from the mirror of my 1920s dressing table? Or was it the room? The house? I never felt at ease there. About a year later, my parents were painting my bedroom wall, so I stayed in my little brother's bedroom on the top bunk. Again, I was woken up in the early hours, but this time to cries of other people, a commotion, lots of shouting of urgent instructions, and the very real sound of burning. And I'll tell you plainly, there's not much more of a terrifying sound than that. It wasn't our house, but the house far up the road on the opposite side, engulfed in flames. A totally wild furnace blowing out all of the downstairs windows. There was a sense on the street of not being able to control anything. Panicked cries rang out everywhere. God, it was awful. I was more terrified than I had ever been. I didn't know the family at all and couldn't see the house that clearly from where we were. But I could hear it. I could feel it. And through the fog of smoke, I could see the extent of the fire and the tip of the uncontrollable flames. My mum and dad kept us away from it as much as they could, ushering us back into the house. It is such an unbearingly tragic story, but after all the children were rescued, the mum in the house was left upstairs. She just couldn't jump, consumed with fear and smoke, and by then, it was too late for her to get out, and she died a horrible death, no doubt, in her bedroom. It goes without saying it was devastating, and this affected the street for a long time. Even now when I pass it, I shudder. I'm not saying my experience was connected, but the woman I saw at the edge of my bed did flash before my mind again. The resigned face, the mist, or was it smoke? The imagined scenario I had of the mum up the street in the burning bedroom seemed intertwined with the apparition I experienced. Another year later, and we had moved, thankfully, as my mum wasn't any closer to seeing it as her own house, and the neighbours weren't getting any more sedate or reasonable. The home we next moved to proved to be the full stop, the happy end of all our house moves, and was the family home we all desired. My mum was laughing more. She took to gardening. This was her land. This was her house. And they're still there, my mum and dad. Happy. There's more to this story though, and it was concluded in my mum's beloved garden last weekend. "You were hysterical," she said again, shaking her head. "I know," was all I could say in response. Grateful I had that glass of red wine in my hand, which I swiftly necked. "Wow, that's quite a story," my sister-in-law added. "Yes," I said, "but well, I'm not sure if it was a night terror. Perhaps I was still dreaming, but it did feel real, and I can still see her face. It was at this point my mum dropped the mic, so to speak, and said, "You know, a woman died in that bedroom. Years and years ago, maybe in the war, your granny was never sure. In a fire." It was at this point I nearly dropped that wine. I never knew, and it would explain so much. Mum never told me as she thought it would frighten me, and the thing is she's not exactly sure of the details now, as sadly my granny is no longer with us, and my dad doesn't really know. So nothing to verify really, but my granny did tell my mum that. I do think it's something I need to research further, find some record, and if I do, I'll let you know. For balance, that room was also my dad's when he was young, and he was very happy and didn't experience anything strange. My little brother had most of his formative happy memories in that house. And for more balance, it's important to remember that I was listening to ghost stories that day, the legend of Bloody Mary in the forecourt of my mind, so perhaps I was a little primed. But saying all of this doesn't sway me in any way, because if I close my eyes, I can still see her face, still remember the magnetic force that positioned me to sit upright and meet her face to face, whoever she was. I've even wondered lately, especially during the process of writing this down to you, and this is going to sound crazy, that she was me, visiting my younger self. When I look in the mirror now, I'm reminded a little of the vision. I don't know why, but then I think, I'm thinking too hard about this. And it was a strange time of change, really. I was changing. My mum was changing. I was trying to find my footing as an adolescent and perhaps my relationship with my mom, and so, I guess, is it any wonder why I asked, "Mum, is that you?" And that is the end of this rather unsettling story, and we wait for Cassie to possibly update us about the history of that house. But perhaps this is something Cassie will never solve. Was it a night terror or a ghostly visitor? Was this apparition perhaps a projection of her own anxiety, or maybe her mum's angst taken shape in some way? Is this even possible? Was it the lady who died in that room, if she did? Or perhaps even a premonition of the poor lady tragically taken by a fire in her street? And 2 women, 2 fires, 1 street is an uncomfortable thought to confront. I'll end by saying that for many of us the past is a treacherous landscape to traverse. It's a place some of us are keen to remember, and for some of us, a place we're just desperate to forget. And I suspect for many of us it straddles somewhere in between. And if you have something in that landscape which you can't forget, still can't quite place but want to remember, a fleeting vision perhaps, an imaginary friend, not that imaginary, a misspent youth contacting the dead, a poltergeist knocking at your door, then write it down and send to us here, because the next person to tell us a tale from their formative bike freewheeling days and beyond short haunts could be you.